Legends in Sergipe, could they have any connection with UFOs and their crew after the intro? We've been here in Aracaju, Sergipe for a few days now, and we've noticed that there's a strong body of UFO cases here, not only in the capital but also in some towns in the countryside. Of course, we made a video about it. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out later. It's about the cases in the capital. But today I wanted to talk to you about something that's really interesting, which are the legends right here from Sergipe. Both legends about creatures and about lights that every now and then show up in the skies around here. And that could also sometimes be interpreted as UFO phenomena. Or maybe the people from here, right, because of folklore and religiosity, would interpret this in a different way. We have ghosts, werewolves, things like that. So let's take a look at some of these legends. The first legend I want to tell you about comes from a city in Sergipe called Itabaiana. And the phenomenon, this legend, became known as the Luzerna of Itabaiana, right? It's a light that appears every now and then, mainly at night, and it's kind of bluish, kind of whitish. Sometimes it has a variation in color, and then it appears, moving through there, making maneuvers in the sky. And this legend became popular after a couple saw this phenomenon and reported it in the media, right? Today, for example, if you look up the Luzerna of Itabaiana on the internet, you'll see some variations of this interesting legend, which probably means this light is related to a UFO phenomenon. Another legend that people talk about, which could actually be a variation of this Luzerna of Itabaiana, is what they call the Luseiro do Sertão, or just light, right? And usually it appears in coastal regions, in the sea, right? This so-called light, right, or Luseiro do Sertão, is also associated with shipwrecks, with times when a storm is about to happen. At least the older folks there, fishermen from those regions, they believed it was an omen, right, of a storm, a shipwreck, or something that could be happening, something that wasn't positive. Usually it was something negative, so these lights would appear over the sea, flying over boats as well. And in this case, this Luseiro do Sertão is also associated, then moving inland, leaving the coast a bit, it is associated with the abduction of people, of children and adults, right? So what is that? A light appears and people disappear inexplicably. Of course, there are people who are abducted by other people, right? And so on. But they found this so-called Luseiro do Sertão interesting because it was an unidentified light, and sometimes certain people, even from the family, would disappear. Some would return after some time and others disappeared, never to come back. Another legendary phenomenon is St. Elmo's fire, right? It's St. Elmo's fire. St. Elmo appears more in the village of Cruz das Graças in the municipality called Nossa Senhora Aparecida, also here in Sergipe. And he from time to time is associated with the figure of João Galafus. João Galafus is there in the books of legends of folklore, who would also be a light, right? Who from time to time appears in these regions, but they call it St. Elmo's fire. Some call it Will-o'-the-Wisp. We have, of course, in regions where there are cemeteries or some kind of decomposition, right? We usually have gases released there, which is natural and explainable. But there's this thing called St. Elmo's fire, which is also an inexplicable light. When they come, they feel a certain fear, right? And João Galafus is also a legend that's associated, connected with this phenomenon of St. Elmo's fire. Another very popular legend, especially in the mountain region, right? Because there are some small hills here, is the golden ram, right? So yeah, it's in a region where there's gold, obviously. But people used to say when this ram appeared, right, this little golden lamb, it meant that someone was going to find it because it was made available, right? Like in an enchanted way, this gold would appear for someone there who deserved that kind of thing. Other people say they saw a kind of golden light on top of the hills, and looking from afar, they imagined it was a kind of lamb, right? It's a little sheep, a golden lamb that's there, but it could also be a flying object. Unidentified, what we call in ufology a UFO probe. They're those smaller objects, right, that every now and then are wandering around making maneuvers in the mountains. As it happens a lot, for example, in the state of Minas Gerais, the so-called mother of gold fireball, right? But here in the state of Sergipe, every now and then they call it the golden ram. Another legend that's also very present here in the region, and this one is about creatures, is the so-called werewolf. There's a very well-known legend here which is about João Valentim, right? Everyone knows it. He's from Aquidabá, right? But his legend, the werewolf one, about this João Valentim, it spread more in the Monte Alegre region, in Sergipe and around there, because that's where this João Valentim used to go around, right? So there are still many living witnesses today who talk about this legend that he would turn into a wolf there, right? He would turn into a werewolf, right? The wolfman. So there are also, like on the internet, you can find a lot of testimonies, right? From people talking about this Sergipe legend. Now, bringing it to ufology, we know there are cases out there that involve hairy creatures, right? So there's the famous case from 1954 in Venezuela. The Varginha case itself in Minas Gerais featured a hairy creature and several others, right? In Bahia as well, right? In the video where we talked about Aracaju and where we mentioned some cases from the countryside of Bahia, there are also cases involving hairy creatures. And in that region, for example, in Bahia, there weren't any apes or monkeys there that could explain this kind of thing. We know about lycanthropy, right? Which are these legends about men turning into wolves. There are a lot of superstitions based on that, but actually we don't really know what it is. What we do know is that every now and then, even the regular locals here see this creature, right? Yeah, but it's something unexplainable. Whether it's related to the UFO phenomenon or not, we're not really sure. Now, there's another creature that they call Caipora here. And in other states, for example, in Pernambuco, we have Maria Flozinha, right? Which is the same thing, right? So it would be a kind of woman with her whole body covered in hair who from time to time appears in the forest, mainly haunting some hunters. So we don't know, right, if this is related to the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects or not. But these are creatures that from time to time show up in the regions, in the mountains, in the forests, and people have been reporting them for decades, right? So this must exist in some way, right? It can't be just folklore, right? Because there are so many people reporting in the same way, the same sightings of these bizarre and unusual beings. To complement the legends, here in Sergipe we have what they call a haunting, right? So what is that? It's a kind of luminous entity, right? Kind of transparent. It's the ghost that we know, and it's usually associated with the fact that there are buried pots. What is that? It's like a pot, an old iron pan, where people used to keep their valuables buried under fruit trees, right? Sometimes in ravines too. Sometimes under the floorboards of the house, right? And then after that, people would die, it would stay there, and it seems like the person comes back haunting that area. So people call it a haunting. Yeah, besides those cases, there are every now and then beings that are luminous, that appear along with these lights, right? The lantern, the beacon of the backlands. So it's not really known if in some cases it might be related to the UFO phenomenon. I believe it is, yes, but in other cases it's about hauntings, something more spiritual. But when someone sees that, all they want to do is run, just run away, because it's something scary, right? Something that really causes panic, a general sense of fear. And, we have to cut some slack too, right? All these cases, these legends, that happen, there are real things that were actually seen. But the older folks sometimes made up some legends, some things to scare the kids, right? So they wouldn't leave the house late at night and wouldn't risk being kidnapped, by someone who wanted to do harm, something like that. So there are all these things, right? There are cases that were made up, to scare the children. And there are cases that every now and then actually happen and are real, related to the UFO phenomenon and to the local culture. So if you like this video, click the like button, leave your comments, and see you in the next video, live podcast with Edison Boaventura.